Welcome to the show No Instructions, where we meet with founders and interview them about starting and growing their businesses. I'm your host, Chad Ingram, 3-time founder and CEO at Distro. Distro is a platform to help businesses build teams by breaking down borders around the world. Let's go ahead and get started with today's guest and see how they built their business. Today we have Tyler Babb with us from Labl. Previously, it was called SmartShip, right?
That's right. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Aren't you glad I remembered about the rebrand?
I'm so glad you remember. Most people forget.
Yeah, for sure. Well, cool. We're grateful to have you here today. As you know, we have you on to learn about your story and to learn about not just Labl's story, but how this came to be for you and what you did and the team. But I think that there's a lot of value in listeners and people, here in Utah and surrounding Utah to hear about the early stages. A lot of people disconnect or have a disconnect with this idea of starting a company and then it actually being a company one day. Most podcasts and, groups and events, they like to talk about these late stage businesses that are already big and what they did to get there and that sort of thing. But I think it's important for more people to be influenced to start a company, knowing like literally what sort of like small things led you to this point. So
yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
One thing that it's all glam and fame when you're starting a business, right?
Right.
Far from the truth, and it's dirty and it's ugly and it's nasty, but as you and I both know, it is so rewarding. And there's nothing more rewarding than building a business.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like you can look at something at the end of the day and say, we built this. People are using it. It's influencing people. And that's certainly where I get a ton of satisfaction out of it. So we're going to talk a bunch about that. But really, we're here to hear your story. So tell us a little bit about where things started for you. When did you go to school, and what did you study? And did you go to school?
I went to school, and not to deviate from that, but everyone asks me as an entrepreneur, are your kids going to go to school? Right?
Yeah.
And it's an interesting question because I always respond, yes, 100%. However, if I see one of my kids gravitating in that direction, they have it, and I see it, like, let's go, baby, right?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a different, maybe a perspective or a way of looking at it. But,
yeah.
Chad, my story starts when I was a teenager.
Okay.
And maybe you have the same sentiment, but I was cutting grass for the neighbors, right?
Yeah.
So many entrepreneurs literally start their path to entrepreneurship by serving their neighbors with, painting curbs.
That's what I did when I was 8.
Yeah, see?
I'm serious.
Mowing their lawn, like
Absolutely.
Whatever it is. And I'll never forget it. Graduated high school. I got this contract that was worth $60,000, $70,000 over the course of the summer. And somehow I fulfilled on it. I got some buddies, and they loved to come out and take their shirts off and get tans and, and hang out in the sun. And, I finished that summer with, as a high school senior, with money, right? I bought my own dirt bike, and I started doing things, and I kind of saw the vision. And then I took a 2-year sabbatical and came back from that learning a ton of things that helped further accelerate my entrepreneur journey, I think.
Yeah.
That's where I started. And ultimately I got into school, went to Utah Valley University, didn't know what I wanted to study, but ultimately I got a degree in international business and finance, and that's kind of the.
And why at the time? What made you think like international business maybe make me rich one day, or what was your thought?
Man, from early age I loved stocks. I love trading the markets, something that my grandfather taught me at kind of an early age, and I always had this vision like. In high school, I got this award in Utah called the Sterling Scholar for Business and Marketing.
Oh, cool.
And they made us go to some big ceremony, and we had to put suits and ties on and everything. I kind of envisioned myself like in a suit and a tie in Chicago or New York. as a day trader, right? And I think that vision kind of started, and I got off, and I ended up being just the opposite. I was a redneck playing in dirt every day, wearing shorts and t-shirts. And so my perspective changed. I don't think the perspective in terms of what I wanted to do in school mattered as much as where I wanted to go.
Okay. Yeah.
So
and you graduated roughly what year was this?
Man, I think we graduated in 2012.
Okay.
13 cool. Maybe.
Yeah. Awesome.
So yeah.
And at that point, you've got this degree. Like, what was the next step for you in life? What were you doing next?
Man, I was graduating and I saw all my friends on this journey to what we believe is success. And what I was seeing is most of my friends were taking jobs at large companies, right? And I was starting to get kind of maybe envious or nervous of the path that I was headed on because I didn't have any of that kind of lined up. Mm-hmm. I had already started a company that was running on the side. I'll get into that. But we would go out to dinner with friends, and I'd always avoid the conversation about work because my friends would have these conversations that seemed sexy and attractive, right?
Right.
Well, come to find out, these guys are all taking jobs, sitting in cubicles in a 4x4.
Yeah.
In the back of an office, right? Making very little impact. And it took me a lot of years to recognize that.
But initially that looked sexy.
Initially it looked sexy. Yeah. I just took a job at Goldman Sachs. Yeah. Right. And, I didn't know what an analyst at Goldman Sachs did, but they sit in a 4x4 cubicle in the back.
But looking at this time as you were finishing school though, did you ever feel like the employment line was for you, or did you feel tempted by that at times because that looked sexier, or did you feel like at some point I'm going to start a business anyway? Like what was your brain like at the time?
No, I think the path was getting a job, right? I didn't know what that looked like. Mm-hmm. I mean, from folks listening to this podcast from Utah, they will understand that we all want to be dentists. And so part of me was thinking, well, let's go be an orthodontist. And so I started interning with some orthodontists and some dentists and seeing kind of what that looked like. And what I realized in that situation is these guys are building businesses, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And great industry, and you can create a lot of wealth through that path. But I also recognized that their ability to make money was reliant on them and their skill sets in their hands. And that's when things started clicking in my mind that I wanted to build something that was scalable, that wasn't necessarily tied to my name,
right,
or my personal skill set. I wanted something that was much more scalable. And I think through some of those experiences, things just kind of started aligning and clicking.
Yeah, I share that same thought. I remember having this thought early on, and I think I was influenced by, I don't know if this exact thing came from the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, but early on in college, before I made the decision to quit school and not go to law school, I remember having the thought, if I'm like either running a small business where I'm owner operator or have a job, I am like, when my head hits the pillow at night, I stop making money. Does that make sense?
It does.
Like I thought about, all right, well, if and when I do something, and it started to become likely I would do something at some point, it was like, I have to do something that can scale beyond me, just like what you're saying. So that makes a ton of sense. So take us back to this first business that you had out of school, before we, get to Labl.
Yeah.
Tell us about that business.
Yeah. So I actually started 2 small businesses while I was in school. And to back up really quick, during this process of my first company, I'm probably 2 years in, I had a neighbor come to me and say, hey, why don't you come shadow me? And he happened to be an attorney.
Wow.
Matter of fact, he was recently the attorney general for the state of Utah, Tom Lee, Rexi's son. And I started looking into that industry as well, and some things just started clicking. Like, this isn't what I want to do. I understood law very well, but I failed business law multiple times, twice, matter of fact, because I couldn't memorize terms. But I almost didn't graduate that year. I was going to have to go to school again because I was failing that class. I failed the capstone in the final exam, went into the professor, sit down with the professor, and she starts asking me questions in a conversation format. And she said, you know what, business law better than 98% of my students, right? Because you understand the concepts. And that's when I realized what I'm doing in business is working, and that's where I'm going.
Yeah.
So it clicked. But let me go back. So entrepreneurial journey. I started in school, decided to go back to cutting grass because I could do it on the weekends and focus on my studies. Allowed a lot of flexibility. And I started building that company from ground up, financed it myself. Ultimately, I was able to grow large enough where I had multiple vehicles and cars and things that I could leverage to.
And this point was after school as it started to kind of grow, or during school?
No, this is 2 years into school. So
Wow.
I was maybe a sophomore going into my junior year. And I start seeing this landscape maintenance company work, right? All of a sudden I have enough work where I need help. And that help starts expanding to where I have 4 or 5 people that are busy every single day of the work week.
Yeah.
While I'm studying, while I'm in the library reading and focused on my exams, right? And so that starts clicking, and I decide, well, you know what? I know how much money it takes me to spin up another crew, okay? $125,000 investment or so. Let's spin up another crew. Let's spin up more contracts. And I started figuring out how to scale the business. And by the time I graduated, we had about 11 crews running.
Wow.
Okay, so that's roughly 45 to 60 full-time employees.
Wow.
They were running while I was studying, right? And so that taught me.
Didn't you feel like you should quit school at some point, though? Did you ever feel like that? Or did you think, let me stick this out?
Oh, man. So school was a battle for me. It was a real struggle.
Yeah.
And I was failing my exams. I just could not pass. But I understood the concepts very well.
Yeah.
And it never really crossed my mind. And I think we just had a lot of pressures from society, a lot of pressure, from my family that school is what we do. So it didn't really cross my mind until I kind of passed the.
What'd your parents do for work?
line.
I know that's a big tangent, but I'm just curious.
Yeah. So, my parents are both self-employed. They both kind of run their own small businesses. Okay. My dad is in sales. My mom's in real estate. So
yeah,
I kind of saw how they built things over the years as well.
Yeah. So I'm sure that had some influence on you. So you've got this business, and at some point you sell it, right? You move on from the landscaping business.
Yeah. Yeah. So things were going well. I mean, this is where I was crazy, right?
Yeah.
I had 2 roommates while I was still in school that actually had built this business. Okay. They started importing products out of China, fair trade manufacturing, outdoor goods was the focus. And they started selling these products online, and they were telling me about it. They're like, why don't you come help us grow this? So I'm like, well, I have about 2 hours free right now a week. Yeah. But I stepped in and helped them start scaling it. And I figured out how to negotiate these contracts on a national level. And when it got a couple deals done with Living Social and Groupon Goods, back then they were very relevant.
Yeah.
And we came into the office on a Monday, and we would have hundreds and hundreds or even thousands of orders. And we're like, how the hell are we going to fulfill these in between class? And I'm thinking in between my other company that's got 40 employees I got to deal with. And we couldn't do it. It was broken. One day we get a cease and desist. We get the legal counsel from Living Social sends us a letter saying, we're going to sue you if you don't start shipping out these orders that we're selling faster.
Wow.
And at that moment, we realized this process is broken. This is not scalable. Something's got to change.
Right. So that leads us into SmartShip, right?
Leads us into Labl. That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So tell us about it. So about what year is this roughly that this idea for SmartShip, now Labl, we'll just refer to it as Labl, but as this problem is coming out, you're obviously talking about there's an old broken system. It's slow. You have customers that are upset with you in this older business. So obviously it gave you some idea to solve it with software. So what was that problem actually that you were solving?
Yeah, Chad wants the juice. You want the meat.
Yeah, yeah.
So here's what was happening. We would load up a truck, we'd get orders, we'd show up to USPS, and these little old ladies would come out and help us. process hundreds of shipping labels at a time. And
Manually.
They hated us.
Yikes.
They didn't have a process. I mean, this was e-commerce was in its infancy at this point, right? Yeah. And we get them processed, and we show up the next day, and we kind of go through the same thing. And it just was not working. They didn't have these e-commerce business units and things like they have structured today. And I found a technology that kind of solved the solution, but wasn't cloud-based. You had to download it on your computer and kind of go through that whole workflow. And our generation, we're used to the cloud. Like, that's all we know. The internet was rolling out, and I was like, this has got to be online. There's got to be a better way to do this. And there wasn't. The problem is, Chad, is my intuition was to go build this thing, but I was scared. I had a lot of things going. I was maybe a semester away or so from graduating with my undergraduate, and I had a lot of fear that was getting in the way of my decision-making process.
Yeah.
And so I delayed, and I actually didn't start that company yet.
Interesting.
But the idea was in my head, and it just
this whole time. Years.
Yeah, this whole time.
Because really, Labl started roughly what year?
Officially December of 2016.
Okay, so you're talking 2-3+ years that you've thought about this thing you could be doing.
It was a minute.
That's a minute. Okay. So either you're very patient and smart, or you're a procrastinator. So what
is it?
You mentioned that it was fear. What were you afraid of?
At the time, it was time. It was capital, right? Yeah. And the big thing that I didn't know is we'll say this for another day, but it wasn't until I was in my early 30s that I was diagnosed with ADHD. I had no clue.
But you had it the whole time.
I had it. We had no idea.
Welcome to the party.
And we had no idea. And so there's a lot of things that just kind of get in your way and cause procrastination with ADHD, as a lot of us that have that know. And one thing I didn't mention here is I got married, and during that time period as well, beautiful girl out of Los Angeles, and we get married, and as part of my entrepreneurial journey, my grandfather comes to me and he says, "Hey, you got married. Your wife's incredible. She's graduated. She has a job. She was a kindergarten teacher. She still is.
Yeah,
just not actively working.
Yeah.
And he says, I'm going to gift you $10,000 for a down payment for a property, but there's a condition. He says, you have to buy a property that I approve of."
And this was your
grandfather.
Your grandfather or hers?
Mine.
Okay.
My granddad. So I'm looking for properties all over, and every time he's like, nope, don't like it. Finally dawns on me that he wants me to get in real estate. It's a passive form of income. We launch. I look. I present a property to him, and it's a side-by-side duplex, absolute hole in the wall. And he says, that's it. You need to put in an offer today. We put in an offer. I buy it. I have immediate cash flow, immediate equity, and I get into another business. Okay. So now I've got 3 businesses, still not graduated with college. And so I'm working a lot of hours. And I think I just didn't have the bandwidth at the time. Thus,
for sure. No wonder you said you didn't do great at school, right? Like, and maybe that's because of, ADHD or whatever, or lack of focus, but like, you were busy.
I was busy.
I mean, you could only do so much. That's crazy. Looking back, was that the right move for you that led you to this point? Do you feel like the right things happened, or is there anything that you would change?
No, I think when I look back, it all aligned beautifully, right? Yeah. I learned more than I probably give credit to through my education. Met some incredible humans along the way that I still have friendships with, relationships with, that we may do business one day, we may not. We may just hang out at dinner.
Right.
And all these other experiences through the landscape maintenance company that I ultimately sold, the outdoor goods business that was in e-commerce, and the real estate, all ended up creating these different skill sets and abilities to kind of scale and go next level, I think.
And then you said one day, all right, I want to do software.
Yeah.
And what did your wife say?
Yeah.
What did she say?
She said, whatever.
Okay.
Sounds crazy to me,
that's
but
a
you
good
do,
woman.
you do you. Yeah, she's very supportive.
That's really awesome. Okay, so let's jump to that point. So this idea was, stewing and festering. At least you had seen this problem, that needed to be done. But, how did you get started?
It's hard to get started going from playing in dirt for a living as a landscaper to software, right? Or real estate. Okay?
I mean, did you get a computer science degree? No, not at all, right?
No.
Okay.
School of hard knocks.
Yeah, exactly.
And so how do you make that transition, right? I knew the world of finance a little bit. I learned how to leverage capital through real estate and through my other company. And what I didn't know is tech, you can't leverage debt to build a business. Banks don't like that business model. There's nothing.
Traditional banks do not.
Traditional banks don't like it. And so how do you build a business, right? So this idea is brewing in my head, and first thing I know is I need a technical co-founder. And so I brought a technical co-founder into the mix, who had actually sold his company recently to a company called Infusionsoft at the time down in Phoenix.
That's right. Right. I forgot that.
Yeah.
Was he co-founders with? Oh my goodness, I'm spacing on the name. The guy that started Pronto.
Zach Mangum.
Zach Mangum. Yeah. Oh, I've met with a couple times. Yeah, a lot of funny connections in that early group. We ended up leasing his old office from Infusionsoft, which was anyway. So you got a great co-founder. So how did that conversation go? He's like, "This sounds compelling. I'm in."
Yeah. So he had an exit and started making some investments and, bought a CrossFit gym, just doing different things. And ultimately wanted to get back into tech. And he had been looking for opportunities for about a year and a half. And I pitched the business model to him. And that's where it aligned. He said, hold on, you're not just a typical SaaS company where I'm paying a monthly fee to use your software, right? You're that plus a whole lot more. And it was ultimately the business model where he got really excited about and ultimately jumped in with me.
Yeah, it's awesome. I've talked with him a few times. He's a really sharp guy.
He's very sharp.
Really thoughtful. So you've got this idea. How do you go from idea to an actual product? Does he start writing code immediately? Does he start thinking about what it will look like and what it will do? Who helped you with that? Because this would have been your first time, right?
Yeah, I'd never been a project manager. I had no idea. I just had a vision.
Yeah.
And luckily, Chris, right, my co-founder, he has an MBA. He's gone through an exit, and so he has a very strong business acumen, which is rare for a technical co-founder.
Right.
And we would not have pulled this off without him. The guy is my brother. He's done amazing things.
And you guys have been working together for quite a while. I mean, you must have built a really good relationship too.
Yeah, we're tight. Yeah, he's one of my best friends for sure.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so we started that relationship and we literally got together every single day.
Wow.
It was at our kitchens. We'd share kitchens, trade off, so our spouses were happy. And we would literally just whiteboard out, user interfaces and we talk about the user experience, and then he would go to town to build the back end. And fortunately, he could come in and build the front end to support it. And we just kind of started the process.
Wow.
Whatever it took.
Yeah, that's awesome. And how long did it take you guys? Well, before I get into revenue and customers, how are you thinking about funding this thing? You had, a couple people together. You obviously, had some other businesses going on, and I believe you sold the outdoor company, not the outdoor company, the landscaping business at some point, right?
Yeah, I sold that company. Look, I'm a good old boy from Utah, from fruit farmers, right? My grandfathers and great grandfathers were fruit farmers.
Yeah,
and that's what we knew. We knew how to work hard.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what raising money meant. I had no idea that world. It didn't come from my heritage. And it's not something that I learned about in school because I wasn't on an entrepreneurial track necessarily. And so all I knew how to do was to finance it myself and build it myself, kind of whatever it takes.
And so that was the intention early on. It's like, we're just going to figure this out, whether we use some of our own money or we're just going to go get customers.
Let's just figure this out.
It's awesome.
And the way every business here operates is through revenue.
Yeah,
having healthy revenue through customers.
They should be that way, right? More often. There's a lot of our technical, counterparts here in the Valley and all over the U.S. really where a lot of us are propped up on a lot of value and not cash flow.
Yeah.
And, now fast forward to, 2023, and it's a really rocky space for tech companies. It's helpful to have cash flow, isn't it?
It is.
Super helpful.
Yeah.
It turns out you're still in business.
Yeah, we're still in business. We ain't dead yet.
So let's go back to how did you guys think about getting customers? So if you had a product, obviously had a great CTO, he's starting to build it. What did you do to get your first customers?
Yeah. I could talk for hours about this whole story. I'm clearly skipping over a lot of details.
Yeah, definitely.
Our first customers came to us by me literally going to events in the park.
Wow.
Right? And seeing if these people were selling online, which most of them were.
Wow.
And we started just convincing these people to come try our software out as kind of beta testers. And we started kind of celebrating wins little by little. And, we didn't know what the software needed to do, but we listened to those people very, very intimately.
Right.
And we would build based on their needs. And oftentimes we would pre-sell. Like, we would say the software would do things that it didn't. And once we knew what they needed, we would spend weekends building, and Chris would code as fast as he could, and we would make it happen.
Yes.
And we would support them, and they worked with us, and they supported us, and it just worked.
I think a lot of first-time founders don't understand how often that is the case, where you are literally, it sounds cliche to say, but you're jumping off of a cliff and building an airplane on the way down. So like this idea of pre-selling or going and talking to people and saying, hey, you're the, leader at this company. Are you experiencing this problem? They say yes or no. If they say yes, then you say, well, if I have a solution to that problem, would you try it out? And in most cases, they're going to say yes, and so just having that sort of problem solving conversation with them early on, I think people would be surprised at how often companies are willing to try it or help you. Because you're obviously solving a good problem for them. So when you're approaching people at this time, did you have a lot of competitors at the time, or were most of your customers just kind of doing it the old school way and then joining Labl? Or did you have to kind of influence them off of another platform to Labl?
Yeah, so at the time, e-com was still somewhat in its infancy, and so a lot of customers were just kind of old school, like we were going into the post office every day, standing in lines for days. And some were on newer platforms, and newer platforms, helped us because they had product market fit.
Yeah.
We were understanding product market fit very quickly because our customers were telling us what that was.
Yeah.
And, so we took the competition and we learned from them and learned on their coattails a little bit.
Yeah.
Which is another great way of doing it, right? The market was very small back then. There was only a few players that were doing it right, and they were all venture-backed, by the way.
Yeah.
They all had some pretty deep pockets to go quick, and it helped us kind of learn from them. And they make a lot of mistakes. Man, I'll tell you, a lot of these venture-backed companies make a lot of mistakes, and I like to say we were able to save millions, maybe tens of millions of dollars on their backs.
It's definitely, a second to market advantage, right? Like following the leaders makes it a lot faster, right? And so there's a huge strategy there. In fact, in starting Distro, there was a market leader in front of us, and we found out about them after we'd already created the idea that they were there. And in some ways it was validating because we knew, right, they're not going to capture the entire market. But we can start to learn very quickly of things that they spent millions of dollars trying in error, right? So I think that's kind of interesting. But So talk us through, like, you started to get your first customers, you start showing revenue, obviously, because that you guys were basically taking a bootstrap focus. And at what point did it go from fun to really hard? And how did that happen? Like, I think the first time I met you in 2019, or was it 2019? I think it was 2019. And you guys were like figuring out the product. And I remember at the time you were very excited about like you were showing me the application. You guys had made like a bunch of strides in building the software itself. But maybe talk about like, some of the challenges that you were dealing with as you were trying to grow the business and hiring employees and all that.
Yeah. Scaling is expensive, right? I mean, that's one major reason that it's a smart idea to raise capital.
Right.
But again, I didn't quite know how to do that at the time. It wasn't really part of my thought process at the time. And we started scaling quickly. We started bringing on much larger brands and building the business, and the product continued to scale out and get better and better over time. There became a point where I couldn't keep up, right? Like we needed to hire people. Everyone on the team was doubling down. Engineering was doubling down. And so I built a very committed team that trusted my vision, believed in my vision, and they still do so today. So I think that's a big part of it is building that culture alignment with people that believe in what you're doing. And then second, how do we keep financing this, right? So 2019, I start meeting with some mentors and friends who start kind of helping me understand how to raise capital. And we kind of started getting solicited by VCs and private equity groups even asking us what we're doing, and a lot of traction going on there. And so I start taking meetings and kind of learning the process. And what was hard during that process, and a lot of entrepreneurs will find this, is venture capitalists buy FOMO, right? They don't want to miss out on an opportunity. And so they'll never say no to companies, but it's also very rare to get them committed, right? We don't understand how rare it actually is.
They'll all take a meeting.
Or multiple meetings for that matter.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So like at what point, if you don't mind sharing, like at what point headcount wise or revenue wise were you at this point when you started feeling like, dude, we are understaffed? Like we don't have enough people to even handle the workflow that we have now. Did you have 10 people, 20 people? What was it like at the time?
So yeah, I think going into 19, I think we had maybe 11 to 12 heads, but we'd gone from $67,000 in revenue the first year to, $6 or $7 million top line income that year.
Wow.
And so we were pushing a lot of revenue with very little resource. Wow. And that was catching up to us quick. Right? That was catching up to us quick. And so my only option at the time, Chad, which a lot of entrepreneurs will relate, was my own access to financing.
Yeah.
So I took proceeds from my company and that I had sold prior, and I plowed 100% of those proceeds into this business because I believed into it.
All in.
Now here's where this gets interesting. All in isn't like, oh, he had an exit and he pumped that into the business. Okay.
Yeah.
That business had traditional financing in place with banks.
Yeah.
And I made the decision, even though I was selling the company, that I wanted to maintain the debt because it was cheap debt.
Right.
So I maintained the debt load and figured, well, I can make these monthly installments on that business I sold, even though the cash flow is gone.
That debt was probably personal debt too, right?
Attached
to your head.
All personally guaranteed debt.
Wow, yeah.
And so I take that. I'm like, there's no business to make the installments, but I'll figure it out. And so I did, but I plowed that into this other company because it's growing so fast. And we financed it that way. Well, lo and behold, we kept growing. Our acceleration kind of picked up again. We grew by, gross grew by 360% that next year. And we were tapping out. And so...
Still bootstrapped.
Yeah. And we decide to look at raising, and that's a long process, man. We're in it, and I'm trying to figure it out, and there's a learning curve, and it's taking too long, and I don't have options. So what I do is these rental properties I've been buying every year, okay? I start selling a couple rental properties, pull the cash, pull the profits out of those and fund the business. Then I get a little more savvy. So I'm like, well, why don't I just do cash out refinances on some of these? Because I have equity, so I can maintain the property. So I cash out refinance some of these. I throw those proceeds into it. And then I get more aggressive because I need more cash. And I say, well, let's go take out some HELOCs, some home equity line of credits on these babies. Before I know it, I tap those out. Okay.
So how much, just to put in perspective, how much were you guys losing a month, do you think, in this time frame?
Relatively speaking, we were maintaining our burn to a healthy level, I believe, which is around $60,000 a month.
Okay, not crazy.
Not
for
crazy.
That revenue. Definitely not crazy. Your counterparts would be like 300,000 at that time.
300,000 or 400,000.
Yeah, easily.
When it's personal capital, though, that's a lot of capital.
Which, by the way, in 2018, 2019, you could buy a house for that.
Yeah.
Every month.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, continue.
So that wasn't on my mind, right? I'm just trying to keep up with the business and making sure that I make payroll every 2 weeks and that we keep growing. And so all those lines are tapped, right? And we're trying to figure out what to do. And I'm starting to have problems with banks expanding my lines because I don't have any assets to collateralize and keep moving things forward. And so what's my best next option?
What?
Credit cards. Let's do this.
And then the last option is not paying your tax bill. That's the last option.
That's the last option.
One. So tell us about the credit cards.
That's not an option though. Like, I see too many guys going down this road of bankruptcy and like whatever, I'll figure it out later. And my wife and I have made some pretty aggressive commitments that we will never default on our loans and we will always pay back those loans that we borrowed because there's people behind those, right?
Yeah.
And I care a lot about people.
Yeah.
And I've always made that commitment that no matter what happens, I will make good on those.
So let's talk about your wife, Cheryl, right? Where's she at in all this? Like, you're doing some crazy financial jujitsu over here, like juggling assets, robbing Peter to pay Paul to make payroll, which, by the way, is a common story here. Where's she in all this? What'd she think?
She's a rock star. She genuinely believes in me, and she's realistic as well, right? So she doesn't allow my optimism to be naive.
Sure.
She believes that I have a plan, and I'll attack the plan, that it ultimately will work out, and she's a believer. Now, I did have one issue with her because this was this was 19, okay, going into 20, right before COVID.
Yeah.
And
which we're going to talk about next.
I pulled money out of a hat more than one time to make payroll because I was committed. Like, I will never miss payroll. To this day, 16 years of being an entrepreneur, I have yet to miss payroll.
Yeah.
And I refuse to do it. And so I'm pulling money out of a hat. And middle of December, I needed to lay people off. There was nothing left. I was tapped. But I couldn't do it.
2019 or
2019.
Right before 2020. Okay.
Yeah. And I was tapped. And, I didn't recognize at the time, and this is another story for another day, but I started sinking into depression. I call it financial depression.
Yeah.
Because I think it was long-term. It wasn't, luckily it wasn't ongoing forever. And Cheryl caught me. And so she helped me kind of work through that process. But the breaking point was mid-December. There was no way I was paying anybody. Credit card companies were denying me left and right. But my credit was still in the 700s because I had so much credit that I was still paying on every single month.
Wow.
Apple releases, I get this notification on my phone, Chad, that Apple had just launched their Apple Card with Goldman Sachs. And the thought came to me, well, their database isn't synced with Amex and Visa and MasterCard. I'm going to apply. I applied in minutes, and they opened me up with a $100,000 line immediately. I ran that through the company's merchant processing. It cost me 3% credit card fee. And that's how I made payroll to get people through Christmas.
Okay, so just so everyone understands what we're talking about here, he pulls a credit card and charges his own merchant processing to pull the cash from that card to then make payroll. That's one of the most baller things I've heard on this show so far. So that it's amazing. Like the creative things that we must do to survive. Okay, now let's fast forward a little bit. COVID happens. You made payroll. You got out of this depression rut, right? Didn't last too long, but you got out of it. And COVID happens. What happens? March of 2020. What happens?
So before we made payroll on Christmas, right? My wife calls, and I've never heard her so angry in my entire life. She's not an angry person.
What'd you do?
She couldn't buy groceries.
Wow. Because
our credit cards were all maxed, including the new Apple card I just paid for or applied for. And she didn't know everything that was going on. All she said is, make sure that you don't take care of us, or that
you do.
Wow. Make sure you take care of us.
Yeah.
I believe that you'll figure this thing out. And that was it, right? She kind of laid off the gas, and COVID hit about 2 months later. First time in my career, I had to trim some fat and let people go, which was so heartbreaking for me because I felt a responsibility to take care of these people.
Yeah.
Take care of their spouses, take care of their kids, right? They all have mortgages and car payments to make.
Right. You know, founders, like, we don't just have the pressure of feeding our own family. We also feed everyone else in the company. You know, like, it's not just our own family we worry about everybody. So
we do. And it's gratifying.
Yeah, for sure.
It really is. It's gratifying. And not only do we sacrifice to make it happen for them, but they sacrifice for us.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. And that aligned. And so I had to do my first riff, and it was devastating. It like crushed my heart. And lo and behold, 2 to 3 weeks later, COVID starts hitting the media with a vengeance.
Yeah.
And this thing starts taking off. And within 90 days, our business just explodes. 90 days, our business grows by 300-400% overnight. And long story short, within 12 months' time, I pulled myself personally out of 7 figures in debt, and we kind of got things back on track. And so COVID was devastating to the world, and there are a lot of sensitivity around this, right? But we were one of the benefactors that were fortunate or blessed to have COVID, help our business.
Yeah,
in some ways.
we had a similar situation with Brett Larson from eVisit, who came on the show too.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
Brett's incredible.
Yeah, super sharp guy, and their business was doing well, and then the pandemic happened, and then it exploded. And in a similar way, you kind of saw that growth as well. So tell us about where you are today. Let's fast forward. You go through this huge growth spurt after e-commerce blows up after COVID. And, what do things look like for you today?
Yeah. Great question. So the business is doing well. E-commerce is flat.
Yeah.
This economy is tough. And so we're seeing a lot of our merchants that are just flat or dying. Mm-hmm. And we see a lot that are thriving, that are just crushing it. And their strategies are different. And there's a very clear reason a lot of these brands are still thriving in this environment. And we're doing everything we can to support both sides of it, right? We're trying to consult and help brands from both sides of it and just keep growing. The business, coming out of last year will be a little bit slower. We've been growing at over 100% for almost 7 years straight.
Wow.
Greater than 100% year over year. This year will be a little more flat. I'm hoping to close out the year around 40-45% and get back on track next year. Hopefully, if the economy improves and get back onto some of those bigger growth numbers.
Yeah.
And we're happy. We're excited about where we're at. We've brought in some new talent this year, which is we're super excited about to kind of help us get next level.
Yeah, that's really awesome. So for these customers, and we'll kind of close on this. And congrats on the growth. You guys have done a fantastic job. And still maintain bootstrapped. You guys have really blown this business up without going and raising a big round of funding. That's super impressive. So with your customers that are doing well, despite kind of a dicey economy the last year, what's working for them? What do you think, and what are you noticing? What sort of trend is working for them?
Yeah, I mean, product market fit, obviously, for direct-to-consumer brands is critical.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of things that play into this, but I think their marketing strategies, obviously, as a e-commerce business, is critical. It comes down to how good your marketing strategies are, how good is your content, what are your relationship with partners, what is your relationship with influencer marketers that seem to be taking over the world.
Yeah.
And so a lot of those things definitely play into their success in terms of how they're running their business in this economy.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But we're grateful for all of them. One thing I forgot in the early days of growing a tech company is that relationships matter. And my dad has always taught me that. He's big on that. And even though you can grow a tech company and have hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of customers, I don't believe anymore that relationships are dead. And every customer matters. They all make an impact. And I think that's one reason we keep thriving. I mean, we're retaining customers at 98% year over year.
Yeah.
We don't churn customers. And so I think that mutual respect that we have with them is working. So we're excited about the future.
That's really awesome. Well, thanks for coming on the show today and sharing a little bit about Labl. So if anyone wants to reach you, how would they reach you?
Yeah, just go to lablpx.com and, submit a form. And obviously one of us will be reaching out pretty quick.
Awesome.
So,
okay. Well, thank you. We'll talk to you later.
Chad, thanks.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to today's episode of No Instructions. Feel free to leave us a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe so we can continue producing these podcasts. Today's episode was brought to you by Distro. Distro is a platform to help startups find, hire, and pay employees in over 200 countries. It's free to use. Go to distro.io to set up your free account today.